Religious freedom was a major inspiration for the founding of the early American Republic, revered by our founding fathers and recognized in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution as a fundamental right. And I'll pause and say that today is Constitution Day. Happy Constitution Day. 1787, the Constitution was ratified with a promise that the first 10 amendments would be added as the Bill of Rights, and so we recognize and celebrate that today. It's also been repeatedly recognized internationally. The first U.S. President, George Washington, affirmed in his 1796 farewell address that of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. This view enjoyed continued support in the 19th century, with the de Tocqueville writing that religion in America must be regarded as the first of their political institutions, for if it does not impart a taste for freedom, it facilitates the use of it. Indeed, religious liberty provided the foundation for our country's modern political order, respect for democracy and rule of law. Similarly, the ability to worship and exercise one's faith without fear of attack, censure, bribery, or government reprisal is one of the most important metrics of freedom in any country. Today, we meet to examine the state of religious freedom in the Western Hemisphere, home to Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim faiths, as well as a range of indigenous beliefs. In particular, as Latin America contains nearly half of the world's Catholics and the first Latin American Pope is set to address Congress next week, I believe this hearing is timely in bringing public awareness to the importance of international religious freedom. While religious minorities in Latin America and the Caribbean do not experience the same level of persecution they face elsewhere in the world, i.e. ISIS in the Middle East, the state of religious freedom in our own hemisphere does deserve our attention. Unfortunately, this year has seen a noticeable uptick in violations of religious freedom in several countries in the region. While most governments have constitutions with clauses that protect religious freedom, the implementation of those protections are often not rigorously enforced, and in certain countries, other laws or regulations have been written that make religious worship and activities hard. For instance, in countries such as Bolivia, Cuba, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, it is government action itself that contributes directly to difficulties in religious practice. In other countries, such as Argentina, Mexico, and Colombia, the combination of criminal groups, lawless environments, or impunity prevents the free exercise of religious worship and activities. In particular, this subcommittee has heard multiple reports of Catholic and Protestant churches being forced to pay fines to criminal groups in the region in order to remain open. Church members have been threatened and internally displaced in some cases, and pastors have faced extortion and assassination attempts. Significantly, churches that engage in outreach and assistance to victims of human trafficking, drug and alcohol addicts, or former members of criminal groups have found themselves targets of criminal groups, which see church efforts as a threat to their own control, objectives, or activities. Furthermore, many countries in Latin America require government registration of churches, and in the cases of Bolivia and Peru, this registration can be cumbersome, intrusive, and are just plain difficult. So I'm deeply concerned about Bolivia's Law 351, passed in 2013, which forces all religious organizations to reapply for legal standing while imposing burdensome preconditions that appear restrictive to the rights of religious organizations. Moreover, in Nicaragua, reports surfaced in July 2013 that President Ortega was exploiting religious symbols for political gain and using financial pressure on Catholic and Protestant groups to exert political influence. Similarly, in Ecuador, there have been reports of actions by the Ecuadorian government to remove all religious images from regional hospitals and obstruct the work of Catholic priests in prisons. Given the hearing this subcommittee held in July on threats to press freedoms in the Americas and President Correa's actions last week to shut down Fundamedios, an organization with a critical mission to provide information on freedom of expression in Ecuador, I'm troubled at what might be next for a religious organization in Ecuador who dare to diverge from Korea's views. So in June 2014, I sent a letter to Ambassador of Mexico highlighting 2 cases of religious freedom violations and requesting that Mexico prioritize accountability for perpetrators who commit violent crimes under the guise of religion. I'd like to commend Mexico's actions in taking steps to address some of these issues while acknowledging that more work still remains. Given the security environment in Mexico, the Catholic Multimedia Center reported last December that Mexico is the most dangerous country in the world to be a Catholic priest, and 80% of cases involving attacks on priests in Mexico are not resolved. Further, while Mexico's Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, and abuse of Mexico's law of uses and customs has led to widespread cases of religious intolerance, which remain unaddressed today. Furthermore, in Colombia, various NGOs have reported an increase in violence toward religious organizations by criminal paramilitary groups, given the internal armed conflict and Colombia FARC peace talks. Allegedly, this violence has included poisoning, burning of houses, and the closing of about 20 churches, torture, killings, and kidnapping of children for use as child soldiers. In contrast, in Cuba, the persecution of religious organizations have been driven by the government. Although its constitution guarantees freedom of religion, it has a caveat that this can be restricted if it does not align with the socialist objectives. Today, Cuban government continues to severely restrict religious liberty. Churches must be registered in order to import religious material, meet in houses authorized for worship, or travel abroad for religious purposes. No Protestant religious schools are allowed, and the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons have yet to receive recognition by the government. Last year, 2 pastors were arrested and detained by the police, and earlier this year, the government began enforcing Legal Decree 322 to seize church properties, and in May, the property of Maranatha First Baptist Church was confiscated. Cuban authorities also continue their brutality against religious worshipers, often violent, dragging out women affiliated with the Ladies in White group from Sunday morning services. In conclusion, there are many disturbing reports of religious freedom violations in our own hemisphere, and this does not bode well for the health of these countries, for religious freedom is utterly critical to the protection and development of free societies. As historian Russell Kirk has written, all the aspects of any civilization arise out of the people's religion. Its politics, its economics, its arts, its sciences, even its simple crafts are the byproduct of religious insights. Consequently, countries that respect religious freedom allow all of these aspects of their cultures to flourish, while those that fail to protect religious freedom will not see these benefits. I look forward to hearing from our expert witnesses today on how they rate the Obama administration's priority of religious freedom in the Western Hemisphere, and how and what the U.S. can engage with the countries in the region support religious freedom. So it should be a very lively hearing, and again, I apologize that we will be interrupted, but I'll now yield to the ranking member, Ms. Sears from New Jersey, for an opening statement.